Jonathan Graves settled into his first-class seat, contemplating the details of the upcoming contract. The plane slowly taxied to the runway, and the airport lights began to flicker in the window, growing smaller and smaller. Memories of the past and plans for the future mixed in Jonathan's mind, filling his soul with a strange sense of anticipation. Not long ago, he could only dream of such trips. Growing up in a family of humble teachers, he knew the value of money and hard work. At 16, when his peers were spending their summers having fun, Jonathan worked at a car wash. Water and foam, the sound of running washers, these were his first steps toward independence. Memories of those days still made him smile. It was the beginning of his journey. After high school, he got a job at a local store. Sales required patience, attention to detail, and the ability to interact with people. Each day was different. Each customer needed an individual approach, and Jonathan enjoyed this variety. He quickly learned to read customers' desires, anticipate their questions, and offer solutions before they could even articulate their problems. The store manager quickly noticed the young man's diligence and resourcefulness. A promotion to department manager came unexpectedly to Jonathan, but he accepted the challenge without hesitation. It was an opportunity to learn something new, a chance to prove himself and show that he could do more. Under his leadership, the department started generating more profit, and he himself learned to coordinate a team, becoming its leader and mentor. However, deep down, Jonathan knew that this was not enough for complete happiness. University became his next goal, a place where the world opens up in all its colors. He worked during the day and studied at night, preparing for exams. His family supported him, although they couldn't help financially. It was a time of trials when each day brought new challenges, but also new victories. Being accepted into a prestigious university was a moment of true pride for him. On the first day of classes, he walked around the campus, looking at the surrounding buildings and people, feeling like part of something big and important. In this prestigious institution, he not only gained professional knowledge, but also met his future wife, Kelly. She was a tall brunette with a proud and independent look that immediately caught his attention. Their first meeting, first words, first date on the Ferris wheel, all these moments were etched in his memory forever. "Kelly, you know how I feel about you. The moment I first saw you, my life split into before and after." Those words of initial gratitude echoed in his ears as if it were yesterday. Jonathan stood at the entrance of the university library, holding in his hand a freshly printed copy of a rare edition of Keats' poetry. It was a gift for Kelly, which he had managed to find through his part-time work at an antique shop. Throughout all the years they had been together, Kelly had given him not only love, but also faith in himself. He felt it was time to take the next step. Kelly was waiting for him at the usual spot by the fountain, surrounded by piles of textbooks and notes. When she saw Jonathan, her face lit up with a smile. "Hi, how was your day?" she asked, packing her books into her bag. "Busy, as always. But I found a moment for a special gift." Jonathan handed her the book. "Oh, Jonathan, it's Keats. How did you know?" Kelly affectionately stroked the cover. "You mentioned him on our first date, remember?" He smiled. "Of course I remember. Thank you, my love. You always make me feel special." Jonathan looked at her, his heart filled with warmth. "Kelly, there's something else I wanted to discuss with you. Will you come with me?" He offered her his hand, and they headed towards the university exit. Heading towards the Ferris wheel, the place where it all began, Jonathan felt nervous excitement. He had planned everything meticulously. The ride slowly lifted them above the city, and the view became increasingly breathtaking. Once they reached the top, Jonathan took Kelly's hands in his. "Remember, it was right here where I first confessed my feelings for you. I said you would be mine only. Will you be my wife?" His voice trembled with excitement. Kelly froze, then covered her face with her hands and started crying. "Of course, I will be your wife." Her voice was full of joy. They hugged and kissed, surrounded by the stars and lights of the night city. Jonathan felt like the happiest person in the world. "I love you, Kelly, and I will always be by your side," he whispered as the wheel began to descend back to the ground. "And I love you, Jonathan. I never doubted that we were meant for each other." Kelly looked straight into his eyes. Years later, Remembering this moment, Jonathan always felt grateful that fate had brought them together. Every difficult moment, when it seemed all strength was gone, Kelly was there to support him. "I know you'll make it through. We'll do it together." Her words gave him the strength to keep going, overcoming any obstacles. The sun was just beginning to set when Jonathan parked the taxi in front of their small yet cozy home, which he shared with Kelly. These months had been full of trials. His first business, a shop selling rare books that he had opened with such enthusiasm, couldn't withstand the competition and closed, leaving behind only debts. Kelly met him at the doorstep, her smile like balm to his wounded heart. She handed him a cup of hot coffee and quietly asked, "How was your day, my love?" "Tough," sighed Jonathan, sitting down on the steps beside her. "It seems like every day gets harder and harder." Kelly took his hand and pulled him close. "Maybe we can figure out together how to influence the situation." "Without you, I would have given up long ago," he confessed, tears welling up in his eyes. "I've lost everything, Kelly. It feels like there's no way to turn things around now." "There's always a chance to find a new solution," she replied firmly. "We'll find a way." Those words inspired Jonathan. Over the next few weeks, he worked as a taxi driver, while Kelly landed a job as a secretary at a construction company. Life was tough, but in the evenings when they met at home, their little world felt like a fortress against all odds. Jonathan eventually sorted out his debts and decided to try something new again. After months of relentless work and numerous investments, Jonathan felt that his new project, a revolutionary water treatment technology, was finally ready for presentation to investors. Everything was meticulously organized, the engineering team was confident in success, and Jonathan sensed a new wave of success on the horizon. The day of the presentation started with optimism, the large hall filled with people, anticipation palpable in the air, and Jonathan, standing at the podium, looked out at the sea of interested faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began his speech, "today you will witness the dawn of a new era in water purification technology. Our project is not only economically viable, but will also have a profound ecological impact on the global community." As he continued, tension and interest grew in the room. He confidently moved to the demonstration, activating the device. Initially, everything went well. However, suddenly, technical glitches emerged. Control panels began emitting strange sounds, and then one of the filters cracked, causing an immediate water leak onto the floor. Silence fell over the room, followed by whispers and conversations. Jonathan, frozen in horror, tried to regain control. "I apologize, it seems we're experiencing some minor technical difficulties," he quickly stated, trying to mitigate the situation. He turned to his chief engineer, Marcus, who rushed to the control panel. "Marcus, what's happening?" Jonathan asked quietly, trying not to let others overhear. "I'm not sure, Jonathan. It seems one of the filters couldn't handle the pressure." "We should have checked this thoroughly," Marcus replied, visibly concerned and startled. "We checked everything yesterday," Jonathan retorted, feeling his patience waning. At that moment, one of the investors raised a hand. "Mr. Graves, are you sure your project is sufficiently developed to seek investments? It seems there are serious issues." Jonathan tried to remain calm. "Thank you for your question. As you can see, every project can encounter unforeseen challenges. We are fully in control of the situation and confident that we will find a solution quickly. Our team is already working on it." "How can you guarantee results if even the demonstration didn't go smoothly?" asked another investor, skepticism clear in his voice. "I understand your doubts," Jonathan began, feeling sweat trickling down his back. "Technical glitches are always a risk, but we have invested a lot of resources and time into developing this technology. The issues we face today will be resolved swiftly, and I am prepared to personally demonstrate an updated version to you in the coming days." The investors exchanged glances, and it was evident that some had already made up their minds. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Graves. We will be in touch," said one of them, rising and heading towards the exit. The others followed suit. Jonathan stood there, paralyzed, unable to believe what had just transpired. Marcus approached him, looking equally stunned. "Jonathan, we need to figure out what went wrong. We can fix this," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "How?" Jonathan turned to him, anger and despair battling in his eyes. We've lost their trust. This was our only chance. That evening, returning home, Jonathan was devastated. Kelly saw his state and immediately sensed something was wrong. "Jonathan, what happened?" she asked, approaching and embracing him. "Everything went wrong, Kelly," he muttered, hugging her back. "The demonstration failed. The device malfunctioned right in front of the investors. I don't know what to do next." Kelly squeezed his hand, looking him in the eyes. "This is just another trial. You've faced difficulties before, and this is no different. You're stronger than you think. But it's not just a difficulty, Kelly. It's a disaster. We've lost their trust, and now we have no funding left. This project was our last hope." Jonathan couldn't hold back the tears streaming down his cheeks. "Last time you spoke like this too, and then you found the strength later and started something new. Right now, you need to calm down and consider everything carefully," Kelly reassured him. But inside Jonathan, there was emptiness. He felt all his efforts and dreams crumbling, and no words could fill that void. That night, he sat in silence for a long time, staring into the darkness, trying to find even a glimmer of hope. The next day in the office, the atmosphere was even more tense. The team was subdued, but continued working on fixing the errors. However, Jonathan knew that without investors, their efforts could be in vain. "We need to pinpoint exactly where the error occurred," Jonathan said, addressing the team. "We can't afford another failure." "I'll check all the connections and pressure in the filters," Marcus offered. "Maybe the problem was with one of the valves." "Excellent. And let's also stress test the system. We need to be sure it can withstand any load," Jonathan added, trying to keep his voice steady. Days passed, and the team worked tirelessly. Each evening, Jonathan returned home late, his body exhausted, his mind filled with worry. Kelly supported him as best she could, but she could see he was nearing exhaustion. "Jonathan, you need to rest," she said one evening when he sat down to work at home again. "You can't work around the clock." "I know, Kelly, but I can't afford weakness right now. If we don't fix everything before the next investor meeting, the project will be lost," he replied, not taking his eyes off the blueprints. "I understand, but you also need to think about your health. Without you, this project won't happen at all," she gently insisted. Jonathan sighed and finally closed his laptop. "You're right. I'm so afraid of another failure," he admitted, embracing her. "It's important not only to work but also to conserve strength for the fight. Let's take a break today," Kelly suggested, leading him to the living room. The following week passed in intense work, but the team managed to address all the shortcomings. However, the mood in the office was subdued. No one knew what lay ahead, and everyone understood that their chances of success had significantly diminished. On the day when Jonathan received a notification from one of the key investors that they were no longer interested in the project, he realized that his hopes had finally crumbled. Sitting in his office, he felt a wave of despair wash over him. He tried to call the investors, but all his attempts to regain their trust were in vain. No one wanted to risk their money after such a public failure. That evening, when Jonathan returned home, he could barely stand. Kelly saw his state and understood what had happened. "They've left, Kelly. They've all left," he said, his voice filled with pain. "We lost them." Kelly approached him, embracing him tightly. "I'm sure a new day will come, and you'll find your way again. You've taken another step, but it doesn't mean it's over. It means you'll soon find your true path." But Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that he had let everyone down, his team, Kelly, and himself. This failure was too much, and he didn't know if he could ever recover from it. Thus, the project remained unfinished and unwanted by anyone. Jonathan was back to square one, having invested even more this time than before. One day, Kelly came home excited. "Jonathan, I have news. My boss mentioned that the company is looking for an architect for a new project. I told him about you. He wants to see your portfolio." "Really?" Jonathan looked at her, hardly believing his luck. "Do you think I have a chance?" "I know you have a chance," Kelly confidently replied. "You're talented, and you just need the opportunity to show it." Kelly's support gave him strength. Jonathan spent the following days working on his portfolio, honing every project he had ever created. When the day of the meeting arrived, he was ready. Jonathan Graves, he introduced himself, entering the company director's office. "I've heard a lot about you, Mr. Graves. Show me what you're capable of, Ray," said the director, reaching out for the portfolio. The presentation exceeded all expectations. The director was impressed and offered Jonathan a contract to develop the new project. Leaving the office, he felt hope budding in his chest. "How did it go?" Kelly impatiently asked over the phone. "They hired me, Kelly. I can't believe it. You were right. We did it." His voice trembled with joy. "You did amazing," she said, and he could feel her smile reaching him even through the phone. The early morning light streamed through the curtains, casting a soft, golden glow into the room. Jonathan Graves woke up earlier than usual, feeling an unprecedented energy and freshness. Today was the first day of his new job as a lead architect at a construction company, a place where he could finally apply all his potential and experience. Kelly was already in the kitchen, pouring fragrant coffee into 2 cups. Her hair fell freely over her shoulders, and she turned with a smile when she heard his footsteps. "Good morning," she said, handing him a cup. "How are you feeling on the eve of your first day?" "A bit nervous," Jonathan admitted, taking the coffee, "but mostly excited. This time, though, I know I'll handle it, Kelly." "Jonathan, it's not always about achieving everything on the first try, but I see in you the courage and strength to prove to the world what you're capable of," she said, touching his hand. "You've already shown that you can achieve anything you set your mind to." After breakfast, Jonathan dressed in his best suit. Looking at his reflection in the mirror, he couldn't believe how far he had come. From early morning shifts at the car wash to this moment, his life seemed entirely new. At work, he was welcomed by a friendly team. The company director personally showed him around the office, introducing him to colleagues. They showed him his new office with an inspiring view of the city from the window. "We're glad to have you on our team, Jonathan," said the director. "We have high expectations for your talent." "Thank you. I'll do my best not to disappoint," Jonathan replied with a confident smile. Later, as he delved into his first significant project, Jonathan felt the adrenaline pulsing through his veins. The work demanded creativity and innovation, and he was full of ideas. Finally, he could show the world what he was capable of. At the end of the workday, Jonathan returned home, filled with stories about his first day at the new job. Kelly listened, her eyes glowing with pride. "It sounds like the beginning of something amazing," she said, having dinner with him. "Yes, it's a new chapter for both of us. And I couldn't have done it without you," Jonathan said, taking her hand. "All the struggles, all the fights were worth it to get here." "And we're just getting started," Kelly smiled. Today, Jonathan Graves is a billionaire with an impeccable reputation and owner of a major corporation. His life is filled with luxury, power, and success. Few know, but he owes it all to his Kelly. His love for her is as strong as it was during their university years. The plane landed, and Jonathan headed to the hotel. He put on his favorite suit, took his folder of papers, rented a car, and headed to the meeting. Jonathan's heart raced in time with the fast music in the cabin of his rented sports car. He had just landed in Germany for important negotiations and now sped along the Autobahn, where speed limits seemed like mere suggestions. His fingers gripped the wheel tightly, and the powerful engine roared, responding to every press of the gas pedal. As always, speed gave him a sense of power and control over the situation, but today something went wrong. In an instant, as he was overtaking a truck, his car unexpectedly skidded. Jonathan tried to stabilize the car, but it was already too late. The car veered off the road and, flipping several times, came to rest on the shoulder. Consciousness returned to Jonathan slowly and painfully. He tried to make sense of what was happening, but his perception was clouded. All he could see were white walls and hear the steady beep of medical equipment. He tried to sit up, but his body didn't obey. A nurse, hearing his groan, hurried to him and immediately called the doctor. The doctor entered the room with a serious look of concern on his face. "What's happening to me?" Jonathan croaked, feeling fear tightening his chest. "Mr. Graves, you've been in a serious accident," the doctor began, checking the monitor. "You were unconscious when you were brought in. We performed surgery to stabilize your condition. Your life is not in danger, but I have some bad news." "I'm listening," Jonathan struggled to focus, trying to suppress his panic. The difficulty of the surgery was due to spinal damage. At this moment, we can't guarantee you'll be able to walk, the doctor sighed, showing his helplessness in the face of such circumstances. This can't be happening. Doc, I'll pay any amount of money, just get me back on my feet, Jonathan exclaimed in desperation. Mr. Graves, we've done everything possible. Now you need time for your body to start healing. We'll continue monitoring and rehabilitation, but please be prepared for any outcome, the doctor said before slowly leaving the room. Left alone, Jonathan felt his world collapsing. The power, success, and control he had so prided himself on vanished in an instant. He felt utterly helpless, trapped in his own body. When Kelly arrived at the hospital, she found him in tears. She took his hand, the very hand he couldn't feel, and quietly said, "I can't believe this happened. Jonathan, you promised me you'd be more careful and stop speeding, but that's all in the past now. It hurts so much to see you like this. Don't give up, my love." Her words reached his heart, reminding him that despite everything, he wasn't alone. The long road to recovery, full of uncertainty but also hope, had begun. The rustling leaves and gentle breeze accompanied Jonathan in his daily trips to the gazebo in the backyard. Sitting in his wheelchair, he often lost himself in thought, contemplating his current situation and the increasingly uncertain future. "Honey, Olivia's made lunch. It's time to come inside." Kelly's soft voice broke the silence, but couldn't dispel his gloomy thoughts. Jonathan slowly turned to her. His gaze was tired and sad. "Kelly, you shouldn't be wasting all your energy on me. You're young. You need a full life," he said, his voice hoarse and weary. "I don't want any other life, Jonathan. I want this life with you." Kelly moved closer, kneeling beside his chair. "Don't talk like you're a burden. I love you and that's all that matters. But I'm a cripple, Kelly. I can't even take care of myself, let alone you. Why don't you just leave and start over?" Jonathan struggled to hold back his emotions, and his words were sharp as a knife. "Because I promised to be with you through everything. In joy and in sorrow, remember? I'll always be here, Jonathan. We'll get through this together. You will walk again, believe me." Her voice was gentle yet firm. Kelly's words always brought him comfort, but now they seemed distant and almost unreal. Jonathan looked at her, but hope in his heart was nearly gone. There were more surgeries ahead, each potentially changing the situation for the better. But no one knew if it would be so. "I'm so tired, Kelly." "Tired of fighting," he admitted, tears filling his eyes. "I know, my love. People face trials, but find the strength to make things right. You've proven time and again you can rise from the ashes, and this time is no different." Kelly took his hand in hers, and her touch was so warm and alive. The months that followed were full of trials and moments of despair that hit Jonathan harder and harder. Every surgery, every day of rehabilitation left Jonathan with no hope for change. Despite all the hardships, Kelly stayed by his side, reminding him that he was ruining her life by holding her to himself. On quiet evenings, when they sat together by the fireplace, Jonathan sometimes caught himself thinking that without her support and love, he would have never made it. Months of rehabilitation and endless days spent in a wheelchair began to take a toll on Jonathan. He became noticeably more irritable and anxious, especially when Kelly left the house. His love and gratitude for her gradually turned into resentment and jealousy that he couldn't control. Every time Kelly prepared to go out to meet friends, Jonathan felt his heart filled with poisonous fear. He couldn't shake the thought that she was meeting someone who could offer her more than he could in his current state. "Kelly, we need to talk," Jonathan said one evening as she was about to leave the house. "Jonathan, I'm running late. Can we talk later?" Kelly was already in her coat, keys in hand. "No, this is important." Now his voice trembled and his hands involuntarily gripped the armrests of his chair. Kelly sighed and sat down across from him. "What's wrong?" "I can't take this anymore. Every time you leave, I feel like you won't come back. That you're meeting someone who can offer you a normal life." His words spilled out chaotically and painfully. "Jonathan, you know how much I love you. Why do you keep torturing yourself?" "Nothing has changed in my feelings for you," Kelly spoke calmly, trying to comfort him. "I can't bear the thought of you being with someone else. Get out of my life." In a fit of desperation, Jonathan swept everything off the bedside table. Medications, books, photos, all scattered across the floor. Kelly jumped up in fright, stepping back. She had never seen him like this. Her face was frozen in an expression of shock and fear. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, quickly gathering her things into a suitcase. Her hands were shaking and tears streamed down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Jonathan. I'm so sorry." A minute later, she was gone, closing the door behind her. Left alone, Jonathan felt his heart shatter. He began to sob loudly, mourning not only Kelly's departure but also the loss of himself, of his life that he had so thoughtlessly destroyed. Those moments of despair and pain showed him how deeply he had sunk into his fears and insecurities. He realized he had become what he had always feared, weak and defenseless, and his main battle was just beginning. Jonathan's house filled with grim silence after Kelly left. The walls seemed to echo his broken heart. Sitting in his chair, he looked at the empty, lifeless rooms where every corner reminded him of Kelly. With each passing minute, his despair deepened. That evening, Jonathan seriously contemplated suicide for the first time. The feeling of loss, resentment, and loneliness became unbearable. He thought about the pills stored in his cabinet, a quick and quiet way to end it all. Just as he stood by the cabinet with a bottle of pills in his hand, there was a knock on the door. It was his old friend Robert, whom he hadn't seen in months. "Jonathan, I've been calling you." "You weren't answering, so I decided to check on you," Robert said as he entered, looking around. He didn't mention that it was Kelly who asked him to check on Jonathan. "Hey, Robert." "Sorry, I've been thinking a lot." Jonathan hid the bottle behind his back, trying to appear calm. "What's that in your hand?" Robert pointed to Jonathan's hand. Trying to be unobtrusive, he stepped closer. "Jonathan, you're scaring me." "What's going on?" Jonathan silently handed the bottle to Robert, and his gaze was full of despair. I don't know how to go on, Robert. Kelly's gone. I feel so useless, so alone." His voice trembled. Robert took the bottle, placed it on the table, and hugged his friend. "Jonathan, please, talk to me. Don't do something you might regret. You're not alone. You'll never be alone as long as I'm here. Let's talk about everything. Let's find another way to help you get out of this state." Their conversation lasted all night. Robert listened as Jonathan poured out his soul, talking about his fears, disappointments, and frustrations. Robert reminded him of the importance of life and that these trials were only temporary. "Life is full of ups and downs, Jonathan, but each morning gives us a new chance to start over. You're stronger than you think, and you can get through this. Let's find you professional help. Let me help you." By morning, Jonathan felt a little better, though exhausted from the sleepless night. The conversation with Robert had given him some strength, even though the deep pain and emptiness still remained in his heart. "Thank you, Robert," Jonathan said. "Your support, it means so much to me. We're friends, and I'll support you. You'd do the same for me, I'm sure. Don't hesitate to call me anytime. Now let's find you a good psychologist. It will help you deal with your feelings and start healing." Robert stood up, walking to the window, looking at the morning landscape. "I don't know if I'll ever fully recover," Jonathan mumbled, looking at his weak hands. "Recovery isn't always about complete healing, Jonathan. Sometimes it's about learning to live with what you have and finding happiness in the small things," Robert said confidently. Jonathan nodded, feeling tears well up in his eyes. He was grateful for his friend's support, who came to him in his moment of despair. He felt he had to move to the next stage of healing for the sake of his loved ones. "I'll try," he whispered, gathering his strength. "For myself and for those who care about me." Robert approached and hugged him tightly once more. "This is the first step, Jonathan, and it's more important than anything else. We'll take this step together." The hospital room filled with the soft light of the morning sun as Jonathan woke up after the surgery that could change his life. Though pain and fatigue were his constant companions, this time he knew there were already changes. This surgery, according to the doctors, had opened a new chapter in his struggle to return to a full life, as Jonathan could already move his fingers. Dr. Meyerson entered the room for the morning checkup, his face reflecting cautious optimism. "How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Graves?" he asked, checking the readings on the monitor. "Better than expected, doctor. Tell me, what are the results? Is there any good news? Jonathan's voice trembled with excitement. Dr. Meyerson smiled, closing the tablet with the medical records. The results are very encouraging. The surgery was successful, and we're seeing significant improvement in the functions of the nervous system in your lower limbs. This gives us reason for optimism regarding your further rehabilitation. So, there's a chance I'll walk again? Jonathan struggled to contain his excitement. Yes, there's a chance. Of course, there's a lot of work ahead, and the rehabilitation process will demand maximum effort from you, but I believe you're ready for this challenge. Dr. Meyerson placed a hand on his shoulder. I'll do everything I can. I have to, for Kelly, Jonathan whispered, his eyes filling with tears. Is she your motivation? The doctor asked, peering intently at his face. Yes, she's always been my support. And even though we're not together right now, I hope I can show her that I haven't given up, that I can be the man I used to be, Jonathan said, struggling with each word. Your determination is the best medicine. We'll do everything we can to help you, Dr. Meyerson said confidently. Since Jonathan was discharged from the hospital, his days were filled with the routine of physical therapy, exercises, and doctor visits. Despite the pain and fatigue, he never missed a session. His determination and persistence gradually allowed him to take more steps on his own. First relying on a cane and then less and less on it. Each step reminded him of Kelly, of her words of support that once gave him strength. He knew that all was not lost and believed that one day they would be together again. In his heart, Jonathan held on to hope, which now illuminated his path forward, a path to healing and a possible reunion. Jonathan sat in the dimly lit office across from the person who might have the answers to all the questions that had tormented him for the past few months. The private detective's office was austere and functional, with shelves filled with folders and documents. Are you sure you want to proceed? The detective asked, his eyes sliding to the photo of Kelly that Jonathan had just handed him. Yes, I need to know. I need to make sure she's okay and that she's really alone, Jonathan replied, feeling his throat tighten with tension. The detective nodded, studying the photograph carefully. Very well, Mr. Graves. I'll do my best to gather the necessary information. Expect a report in your email in the coming days, the detective said, beginning to jot down the details of the case on his laptop. Thank you. Jonathan slowly stood up, leaning on his cane. He felt a mix of relief and anxiety at the thought of the upcoming report. In the following days, Jonathan tried to keep busy, but his thoughts constantly returned to Kelly. Memories of their time together and the pain of their separation still deeply wounded his heart. Finally, one morning, as the first rays of the sun broke through the curtains of his office, his computer chimed with a new message. It was an email from the detective. Jonathan took a deep breath before opening it. The report was meticulously compiled. The detective had gathered data on the places where Kelly usually spent her time, her social activities, and most importantly, her personal life. Each page was accompanied by photos and screenshots from social media, confirming his findings. Jonathan slowly flipped through the pages until his gaze settled on the conclusion. Based on all available data, Miss Kelly remained single. There are no signs of romantic relationships or cohabitation with anyone. The words in the report had a strange effect on Jonathan. On one hand, he felt relieved knowing she hadn't found anyone else. On the other hand, his heart ached at the thought that she might be just as lonely and unhappy as he was. Jonathan sat staring at the screen, feeling old wounds beginning to heal, and with them the desire to win Kelly back. He had to find a way to fix the mistakes of the past. Maybe all is not lost, he whispered to himself, already contemplating his next steps. No matter how difficult the path back to her heart might be, he was ready to take it. Jonathan sat in his car, parked near Kelly's house. He watched as the light in her windows changed its intensity as day turned into evening. Fear and hope battled in his heart as he gathered the courage to see the love of his life. Finally, he got out of the car. Every step towards her door felt like an eternity. Jonathan knocked and the door opened. Kelly stood before him, surprise and confusion in her eyes. Jonathan, what are you doing here? And you're walking again. Her voice was calm, but her gaze was cautious and surprised. Yes, months of rehab, training, and I can walk again for you, Kelly. I I had to see you, to talk. Can we? Can we talk? His question sounded almost like a plea. Kelly nodded, stepping back to let him in. They headed to the living room where Jonathan slowly sat on the couch, leaning on his cane. Kelly sat across from him, her arms crossed on her lap. Kelly, I know this might sound foolish now, but what I did out of desperation, he began, his voice steady but sorrowful. I thought I'd be in a wheelchair forever. I felt helpless, and I thought someone stronger than me should be by your side. Kelly remained silent, listening intently. I was wrong, he continued. There's no excuse for my actions, and I'll understand if you can't forgive me. Tears started to roll down Kelly's cheeks as she looked at him. You know, Jonathan, I thought I'd never be able to forgive you, but my heart says otherwise. Her voice trembled with emotion. Jonathan slowly stood up, leaning on his cane, and walked over to her. He gently took her hands. Kelly, I've lost so much, but realizing that I lost you is the greatest trial of all. If you give me a chance, I promise I will never again let my pain or fear control me. Kelly looked up at him, and in her gaze, he saw peace and forgiveness. I'm giving you this chance, Jonathan, she said with difficulty but with determination. But you need to understand that we both have a lot of work to do on ourselves and our relationship. I'm ready, Kelly. I'm ready to work, to fight, and to do whatever it takes for us to be happy. You're the most important thing in my life, and I can't lose you again. Jonathan spoke with sincerity and resolve. Kelly embraced him, feeling old wounds beginning to heal. We'll start over, step by step, she said softly. But please, don't hurt me again. You hurt me deeply last time. Jonathan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of guilt and pain lift from his shoulders. He knew there would be a lot of work and challenges ahead, but now he felt he had a chance for a new life with the woman he loved more than anything. The evening continued in calm conversation. They reminisced about the best moments of their relationship, laughed, and shared their fears and hopes. Kelly talked about her struggles and how difficult it had been for her after their breakup. I felt like I lost a part of myself, she admitted, looking into his eyes. But time and the support of friends helped me realize that I can cope. And now that you're here again, I want to believe that we can get through this together. Jonathan squeezed her hand tightly, feeling a warm wave of love and gratitude fill his heart. We'll get through this, Kelly. I promise you that. Together, we'll overcome all the difficulties. They spent the evening sitting on the couch, holding each other's hands and discussing how they would build their future. Jonathan felt his heart begin to heal. As Jonathan and Kelly started rebuilding their relationship, each day reminded them of the rebirth of their love. Kelly's home was filled with flowers, and her favorite melodies played in the mornings, creating an atmosphere of tenderness and admiration. One evening, as the city lights began to twinkle, signaling the approach of night, Jonathan took Kelly's hand. Remember our first walk here? He asked as they slowly walked through their favorite streets. Of course, Kelly smiled. You always knew how to make ordinary moments unforgettable. I want every day to be special for you, Jonathan said, stopping to buy her flowers from a street vendor. Later that night, they found themselves at the Ferris wheel where their first romantic chapter began. In the Ferris wheel car, rising above the sparkling city, Jonathan once again got down on one knee. Kelly, this ring is a symbol of my eternal love and commitment to you. Will you be mine forever? His eyes sparkled with happiness. With tears of joy in her eyes, Kelly nodded and whispered, Yes, Jonathan, forever. After that, they went on a long-awaited vacation that felt like a second honeymoon. The trip was full of laughter, conversations, and mutual understanding, as if they were rediscovering each other after a long separation. You know, Jonathan said one day as they sat by the sea watching the sunset, I often thought about how things could have been different, and every time I thank fate that you're here with me again. I don't regret anything, Jonathan. All the trials only strengthened our feelings. I love you more every day, Kelly took his hand. And I love you, he replied, pulling her close. Their vacation flew by, filled with happiness and new memories. When it was time to return home, both felt ready for new challenges and chapters in their life together. Coming home was sweet, as every corner of their house now reminded them of their renewed passion and deep connection. Jonathan and Kelly knew there were still many things ahead, but they were confident. They could overcome any obstacles holding hands. In the following days, Jonathan continued to delight Kelly. Huge bouquets of roses, lilies, and exotic orchids adorned their home. Expensive gifts and surprises became part of their everyday life. Kelly was touched by Jonathan's attention, and her heart filled with love and warmth once more. One of the most memorable evenings was their walk through the night city. The streets were bathed in the soft light of street lamps, and they held hands, savoring every minute spent together. "You know, when we first started, I never thought I could love you even more," Jonathan said, stopping for a moment to look at her. "But now I realize that every day with you makes my love even stronger." Kelly smiled and hugged him. "I feel the same. You've taught me that love can overcome anything, and I'm grateful for every moment spent with you." They danced to the street music, feeling like they were back in their 20s. The music, laughter, and closeness reminded them of how important these little moments were. The sun was setting as Jonathan and Kelly arrived home after their wonderful walk. They discussed future plans, full of hopes and dreams for a new chapter in their life together. But their return was overshadowed by an unexpected appearance. At the gates of their home, under an old oak tree, a boy around 7 years old sat in tattered clothes. He was playing in the dirt, but when he heard the car, he sprang up and ran towards them. "Dad, you're my dad," he exclaimed, looking directly at Jonathan. Jonathan and Kelly exchanged bewildered glances, not understanding what was happening. "Sorry, kid, but you must be mistaken," Jonathan began, but the boy persistently tugged at his hand. "Look," the boy handed him a Grammy photo of a young Jonathan next to a girl, smiling and happy. It was Lucy, his childhood friend. This is Lucy," Jonathan murmured, staring at the photo. Memories of carefree childhood days began to flood his mind. The boy pulled a crumpled note from his pocket and handed it to Jonathan. Jonathan unfolded it, and his eyes quickly scanned the lines. "Dear Jonathan, you might not remember me. This is Lucy. We used to play together every day, throw rocks at Mr. Hall's window, and steal apples from the neighbors. My life has been hard. My parents died when I was 18, and at 20 I had a beautiful son. His father abandoned me during the pregnancy. Edward and I survived as best we could. We barely had enough money for food, and we got clothes from the church. Later, I was diagnosed with cancer. I have no one else to turn to. If you're reading this note, it means I'm already gone. Please raise Edward as your own. Your friend, Lucy." Jonathan read every word carefully, his hands shaking. Each line revealed Lucy in a new light, a woman who had fought and survived, but ultimately had to leave her son in the care of a friend. "Mom spoke highly of you," Edward said quietly. "She said you were the kindest person she ever knew." The boy's words hit Jonathan straight in the heart. He took a deep breath, trying to hold back his tears. "Your mom was an amazing girl, Edward. We played a lot together when we were little. I didn't know she went through so much. Mom died, but she left your address," the boy said softly, his voice trembling with nervousness and fear. Kelly, supporting the seemingly lost Jonathan, gently asked, "What's your name?" "Edward," he replied. "Edward Graves." They all walked into the house together. Jonathan looked at the boy, feeling his heart ache with pain and pity. Deep down, he didn't know how to handle Edward, but he suddenly felt the weight of enormous responsibility. Kelly returned with a plate of sandwiches and a glass of milk, which she set down in front of Edward. The boy smiled gratefully and began to eat. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Kelly asked, sitting down next to him. "Good, thank you," Edward replied between bites. "Now that I've found my dad, I feel better." Jonathan exchanged looks with Kelly. They both knew their lives would change forever. "Edward," Jonathan began after a pause, "we want you to know that you're now part of our family. We'll take care of you." "Yes," Kelly agreed, taking Edward's hand. "You'll never be alone again." The boy smiled, his eyes shining with happiness. They spent that evening together, sharing stories, laughing, and planning for the future. Later, after Edward had fallen asleep, Kelly and Jonathan remained in the living room, reflecting on the day's events. "This was unexpected, but I'm glad he's here," Jonathan admitted. "After everything that's happened, it feels like a new chance for us, for all of us." "Jonathan, he needs you. And you need him too," Kelly said, gently touching his hand. We'll give him all the love and support we can." Jonathan nodded, feeling relief and determination fill his heart. Now that his life had a renewed purpose, he was ready to be the father Edward deserved. "Kelly, I don't know how I'd handle this without you," Jonathan said quietly, looking into her eyes. "You've always been my rock, and now I feel like we have a chance to become a real complete family." Kelly smiled and hugged him tightly. "We'll manage, Jonathan. We're together, and that's what matters most. We'll always be there for each other, and now we have Edward to care for and give him the best life." Jonathan hugged her back and vowed that Edward would never want for anything. What mattered was that they were together and ready to fight for their happiness and the happiness of little Edward.